metropolitan city of the Midwest. Detroit today stands at the threshold of a bright new future, a bright new future, a bright new future. One rich with the promise of fulfillment, 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 a bright new future, a bright new future.
After a mass exodus of over 1 million civilians, all that is left is a crumbling concrete hellscape of urban decay that cannot be salvaged. Streets are lined with vacant homes, but somewhere behind the boarded windows and shattered glass, the ghost remains. In dusty rooms, abandoned belongings serve as haunting reminders of those who once occupied this grand city. These homes were sold for as little as $500, if they sold at all, leaving more than 40% of this grand city to be bulldozed. Economic fallout fills the air as poverty consumes those left to endure the financial implosion. With no promise for tomorrow, desperation fuels acts of mindless violence. So much so, for 4 solid years it was ranked the deadliest city in America, with 70% of its murders remaining unsolved. This post-apocalyptic disaster is no sad prediction of tomorrow, but the truth of today. Once in the U.S. top 20 cities, it is now a modern-day wasteland. But what murdered this thriving metropolis? Some may say the blood is on the hands of the Nain Rouge.
Darken the room, my children of rot, and we shall commence.
The Nain Rouge is an entity that has prowled the streets of Detroit since its very conception. Eyewitnesses describe a short, spidery figure with red, glowing skin, and features that can only be compared to that of the devil's. Shortly after each appearance of the Nain Rouge, calamity was sure to follow, making him a harbinger of doom like our old friend the Mothman. The founder of Detroit, Antoine de la Mothe Cadillac, is said to be the reason why this city has long suffered the specter's wrath. A feast was once held in Cadillac's honor, and a gypsy fortune-teller was called upon to lend her talents to the evening's festivities. The withered crone called Cadillac to her table and requested to see his right hand. While reading his palm, she saw visions of conquest, of victory, and of the Nain Rouge. She cautioned that should the Nain Rouge make its presence known, that it must be appeased, and every effort must be made to not offend this demonic being. If Cadillac should fail to do so, all that he has touched would never prosper, and his heirs would be penniless. Cadillac disregards the gypsy's prophecy, and years go by. One evening, while touring the city he so proudly created, Cadillac hears rumors of a creature prowling its shadows. Cadillac, being a practical man, laughs at the stories, believing them to be the product of dim-witted superstition. As he passes one crooked alley after the next, he feels as though something is following him, keeping pace, and only steps behind. Then with a scream, a figure appears before him. Consumed by fear, Cadillac drew back his cane and struck the Nain Rouge. The creature, unharmed, only smiled at Cadillac, revealing a mouth full of crooked daggers, before sprinting away into the misty night. It was then that Cadillac recalled the warning, but the damage was done. Cadillac died in ruin, and his fortune was lost. The Nain Rouge was seen the day before the Battle of Bloody Run, in which 60 men were killed by Pontiac. In July of 1805, he was seen casually strolling the streets just before a blazing fire consumed the majority of the city. General William Hull saw a vision of the creature grinning from a window as he surrendered Detroit to the British Army, earning him the distinguished honor of being the only American officer sentenced to death by the U.S. In 1967, he was seen glaring from rooftops just before riots broke out across the city. For 5 days and 5 nights, the city was in chaos, leaving in its wake a body count of 43 people and $35 million in property damage. Sightings of the Nain Rouge have diminished with time. Does this mean that he has faded into obscurity, dying with myths and wives' tales? Or is it that he has merely taken time off for a job well done? On July 3rd, 1929, the Evangelist family of Detroit met with a tragedy all their own. Benny Evangelist, his wife Santina, and their 4 children were all butchered with an axe. Benny Evangelist was known throughout the city of Detroit, Michigan for being a mystic healer and cult leader. He was also a self-published author. His book, The Oldest History of the World Discovered by Occult Science, was a memoir of spectral visions he had occurring nightly from 12 a.m. to 3 a.m. for 20-plus years. Several of the visions he wrote of included biblical figures and dismemberment, grimly mirroring the family's own demise. Officers investigating the crime scene discovered the Evangelist's secret basement. In the basement of their home on St. Albans Street, the Evangelist family had created a place of worship for their followers, dubbed the Union Federation of America. There were 12 wax figures, placed around an altar, each said to represent a different celestial being. At the center of the 12 figures was a giant glowing eye suspended from the ceiling, lit with an electric bulb. Near the altar, several articles of clothing were discovered, marked with the names of who they belonged to. These were personal belongings of people the family and their cult were working to put hexes on. Some speculate robbery may have been the motivation behind the family's brutal slaying. Others believe the family was murdered due to unorthodox religious beliefs. But there's another theory, that a rival cult put an end to their heresy. Were they the ones the Evangelists and their cult were trying to curse? If so, it seems their spells have backfired. The great state of Michigan, like all of America, was once untamed wilderness. Imagine, if you will, something as old as those days, that unlike the gifts of nature refuses to heal to mortal man. The bear, the mountain lion, and all the mighty creatures that once dwelled within these forests bear little threat today, as we've removed them from our modern world. The savage strength of the wild beast couldn't find you in the city, or could it? What if the unbridled power of nature and all its night beasts were granted to the blackest souls of the human race, melding together fangs and claws with the cunning and cruelty of man? Beneath the full moon, it is said the loathsome spirits of the forest entwine with flesh, creating a lycanthrope, a loup-garou, a werewolf. The first known documented account of these creatures roaming Michigan was near the woods of Wexford County in 1887. 2 young men had finished work clearing a path of forest. The day was done, and night had fallen, leaving the two with only the light of their kerosene lantern to navigate through the towering oak trees. Just beyond the flickering flame they held before them, shadows passed from tree to tree, filling the two with dread, as they knew they were the unmistakable frames of wolves. The two soldiered on, believing their axes would be enough to defend them. They noticed that one wolf did not flee with the others, but merely hid behind a tree trunk. The two drew closer, one assuring the other that the wolf must be lame or sick. Slowly they approached the figure, remaining still. Suddenly the head of a wolf looked around the trunk of them, its glare conveying nothing but hatred for the two men. The axe glinted in the lantern's light as the men prepared to defend themselves. The beast's lips pulled back as it snarled lowly at them. Then, to the men's horror, the figure rose to its feet. The wolf's head was fixed to a man's shoulders. The huge figure showed mercy, deciding to spare the two, and traveling off into the forest. Many years later, in 1938, Robert Fortney was hunting for sport near the Muskegon River, daring to trespass into their domain, a case in which the hunter becomes the hunted. The river babbled quietly, relieving the eerie silence that night had brought. Near the stony edge of the river's bank, a pack of huge wolves drank the cool water. Fortney realized he was outnumbered, and fearing the fate of Jezebel, he aimed his rifle to the sky and fired a shot, expecting the mindless dogs to scatter. They did not. Rather, they simply looked at Fortney coldly, as if amused by his attempts to startle them. Time stood still, until the wolves turned away and strolled into the tree line. One stood its ground, however, a massive black wolf with blue eyes that were uncomfortably human. Fortney again pulled the trigger, this time with the gun directed at his opponent. To Fortney's horror, this huge black wolf seemed to smile as it stood on its 2 feet and walked away. Needless to say, Fortney ran to his truck and never returned to Paris, Michigan. There were sightings again in Allegan County in the 1950s and Cross Village in 1967. In this age of technology, countless witnesses have taken to the internet to warn that the Michigan Dogman is no campfire tale. They have been spotted prowling near interstates, devouring livestock, and even trying to break into lonely farmhouses. How long will it be before they take to the urban ghost town of Detroit? Doesn't everyone commute for work these days? After all, we all gotta eat. I do hope you enjoyed tonight's episode, my children of rot, as you could be our next show subject of interest. Only time and the lunar cycle can say for certain. But if I were you, I'd err on the side of caution. And as always, remember me as you scroll by. If you liked our show, then please subscribe. As we are now, so you must be. Prepare for death and follow me.